The mere fact that I can actually put this together with bamboo skewers just shows how well it's been made. What's happening, guys? Scott from A Hornet's Nest. Welcome back to episode 15 of Tutorial Tuesday. As always, it's so good to see you. And in today's episode, I'm going to show you how to take these 3D printed parts straight from your printer, get them surface prepped and primed, ready for painting and installation into your cockpit. So, if you've been following along and you watched episode 14 and you have a 3D printer at home, I can guarantee you that you went straight to those files and started printing, and 2 weeks later, you probably have a collection of prints ready to go and you're wondering, now what do I do with them? Well, I'm going to show you how I prep it, the different primers I use, the sanding technique, and the plastic I use, and then a couple of cautions along the way. That way you don't make the same mistakes that I've made, allowing you to have a bit more of a seamless cockpit build. The first thing we're going to want to do is prep our piece that's come straight off the printer. We want to remove all the supports, and then if you've gone and added a little bit of squish to the bottom layer to give good bed adhesion, you're probably going to have what's called an elephant's foot. It's where that first layer is a little bit fatter than the rest because it's squishing down more than the 0.2 millimeter layer height or whatever you've gone and set. But that's okay. I prefer to have the elephant's foot because I know the print's not going to fail. Now, I use the Allegro Neptune 4 Pro, incredible printer, and the only time I've had print failure is because I've been lazy, not because of the machine, so really reliable for this type of work. What I like to do is with the elephant's foot here, I get myself a deburring tool. It's got a fairly sharp edge on the end, so you use it for metal work, and you lightly run it along the side, and you can see that it starts curling that elephant's foot away. And then you can rub your finger along it and you're going to feel that it's nice and smooth. Don't stress too much if you haven't quite got it. You can get some sandpaper or a knife and really clean it up, but this is going to take a good portion of the work away. And you're going to want to do that for all your pieces. Now, I've gone and printed it like that, in that orientation, so it builds upwards. So any of the holes that you see here along the side, which are the Zeus rail holes, will generally have supports in them because it doesn't know how to print overhangs, and you can go do it pretty much fail safe without supports, but I like to put them in there because it kind of keeps the shape of that circle. An easy way to get rid of them is to use a drill with a drill bit diameter just slightly smaller than the hole itself. That way you don't oversize the hole that the heat insert is going to go into. What I do is insert the drill bit in and with a very slow speed, just start boring away. Then give it a bit of a wiggle and you'll hear it cracking in there as it loosens, and then you can pull the entire support out. One go, making real easy work of it, because if you've gone and done what I've done, and I'll show you a bit later on, but I've got and added Zeus holes all the way down each panel. That way I can customize my cockpit at a later date. So let's keep getting these supports out, then we're going to go across to the tent and start priming all of our components. Go, that's looking pretty good. And then you may just want to take your deburring tool, just run it through that hole and just pull out any remaining bits, because it may look clean and it may look like you're going to get the heat insert in there, but when you go start putting screws in there, you don't want plastic fouling through the threads and making an absolute mess of it. Now that there is looking pretty good. We've gone and removed all of the supports. There's a couple of surface imperfections here where the build plate had a bit of an issue, but for most of it, it's looking very nice. Now, I'm going to tell you again when we get to the prepping and priming stage, but you've got to think to yourself, why do I want to putty this? And what parts do I need to putty? Because you can go putty this entire thing and make it look like it's been milled out of a beautiful piece of metal. But all I'm going to be puttying is the parts that I'm seeing because I'm building around it. It's the same way that I didn't edge prep the MDF now. I'm going to build the entire structure, see what edges on the MDF that are actually visible, and then I'm going to prep those components only. Because you can go and putty everything and inadvertently add dimension, and then you're going to ruin the alignment of the different parts. So my recommendation is putty the minimum that you need to do until you know that it's all going to fit, and then you can go back later and fix up a couple more imperfections. So let's head over to the spray shelter now. I'm going to show you two different types of primer and then we're gonna get back here once it's all dry, and then we're gonna start sanding some components. All right, here we are in the spray shelter, ready to go, and it's looking a little different to when you last saw it when we were spraying the MDF. What we've gone and done is we've spanned 2 cheap wire racks across the sawhorses, giving us ample space to spray all of our smaller components. And what I love is the wire racks create a low surface contact area with your piece that you're spraying, stopping all that paint running underneath it, creating a mess on the other side. We're going to be using 2 products today, the SCA Spray Putty and the Omega High Build Primer. The reason I'm showing you both is that even though they have different names, they're going to do the exact same job. And that way, wherever you are in the world, regardless of what your country calls it, you're going to be able to find the right product to make your pieces look really good. All they are is just a really diluted putty that you can spray through a can, making application of it real easy. You could go use putty like a Tamiya putty if you're into modeling, but this stuff is really good and it's going to make the job done really quickly. But if you are going to use this, a couple of words of warning and a couple of precautions that you're going to need to do to make sure you stay safe. First one is you're going to need to get yourself a good respirator. If you've used this stuff before, you know how bad it smells, and generally if something smells bad, it is bad for your body. The chemicals that come out of this are terrible, so keep anyone away from when you're spraying this for at least 15 minutes afterwards to let it dilute and just disperse itself through the air, because you want to protect yourself and the family. And if you have pets at home, don't let them in the area because they're going to be just as sensitive as you. The second thing is you want to do this in an open, well-ventilated area. Now I'm in a spray shelter here, but we've got one massive door in the tent, and on that side of the door as well, where you can't see, is an open wall carport area. So I've got lots of ventilation, keeping this entire project nice and safe. Well, let's get into it. What we're going to do now is we're going to start unpacking all of our right side console pieces here. And just before we start spraying and put the respirator on, I'm going to tell you why I've gone and orientated the pieces this way. That way you don't go and spend your life spraying the wrong part of your piece, because you don't need to go and putty the entire thing. All you want to do is putty the surfaces that are visible once the cockpit is assembled. So let's get into it. Now I've got an orientated each piece, so the visible faces that we're going to be coming into contact with once the pit is built is facing the top, allowing me to spray it. Now, the big thing with this is you don't want to go and start spraying in here, because that's where your MDF is going to slot into. Now in Australia, I'm pretty lucky because I'm using 18mm MDF, and that's a 19.05mm gap. So I've got a little bit of wiggle room. But if you're in the States and you're using 3/4 inch MDF, it's going to slot perfectly into that 3/4 inch gap. So you don't really have a lot of wiggle room if you're priming all your pieces separately. So just be cautious of that. If you do get a bit of primer there, no stress at all, just give it a bit of a sand and then you're good to go. So let's get into it. Light misty coats. I'm going to be using the High Build Primer from Omega first. It says shake it nicely, and then we're going to do several light coats, leaving 5 minutes drying time in between each. So what I'm thinking is I'm going to start with these pieces here with Omega, and then I'm going to switch to the SCA Spray Putty and do those pieces, and then we're going to go from there. So we've gone and given these about 15 minutes between the coats. Now I'm about to apply the second coat, and the reason I've given a little bit longer than the recommended is it's currently raining. If it's raining, you're gonna have moisture in the air, the ability for paint to dry reduces, so give it a little bit longer. What you don't wanna do is apply another coat onto a partially dried coat, because it's then gonna take even longer for that base coat to dry. Well, when we are spraying these, we've got to ask ourselves, what are we actually spraying the putty for? Are we trying to protect the piece in this putty and we're trying to really embed it in there? Or are we just trying to fix surface imperfections? Well, we're just here to fix the surface lines, and I print with 0.2mm layer heights. So the little valleys that we're spraying for has to be less than that. It's really small. But the problem with paint is, if you go and paint an imperfect surface, that imperfection is going to be exacerbated. And you see that a lot when people are showing how to spray putty things, is they spray it till the surface is smooth. Well, you don't do that with these pieces. You're gonna over-dimension them and ruin all the hard work that Open Hornet has put in. What we wanna do is just spray a 0.2 millimeter height of putty onto this, then sand it back down to the 3D printed surface, making it a nice smooth finish. So let's go and put our second coat on here, and then in the same time, we're gonna put the SCA putty on the right-hand components. You'll be able to see the color difference, and then once that's drying, we're gonna take these pieces, take them to the sanding area, and we're gonna start prepping them ready to be painted, because these standalone pieces don't really care too much about their dimensions. We've got the ECS vents here by the footwell. That's their base plate that they sit on. We've even got the OGS vents and a couple of ejection seat items there. So I think what we can do is get those ready for painting, and then we're gonna see if we can spray them that really cool cockpit green. All right, so I've given these components 2 nice coats of their respective primers. You can see the Omega High build is a lot darker than the SCA spray putty, but both of them work just as good. I actually like the lighter gray purely for the fact of you can see the difference between gray plastic and the light primer, but I do love the dark gray coloring of the Omega High build primer because it's the exact same as the undercoat that we used on the MDF. So take that into consideration, but both of them work really well. So let's go get a little cardboard box here. Let's start stacking up some of these components, and we're gonna head across to the sanding station where I'm gonna show you the different ways that I prep these, getting them ready for their paint job. All right, here we are back from the spray station, ready to start sanding these components, getting them ready to be painted that primer green. Now these are standalone components. I know that I don't need to dry fit these to paint them the primer green. They're gonna fit. These are just blocks that go at the back of the ejection seat, same as this, and then we've got an OGS vent that is onto one of the side console panels. The type of sandpaper that you're gonna use is determined by what you're sanding. Now, if you're printing lots of flat sides, you can get away with either using the classic sanding block with a roller sandpaper. You might even want to get a big sheet of sandpaper, plop it on a flat surface, and then sand against that. Or if you're sanding curves, you may want to get yourself a sanding sponge so it molds nicely to that curve. There are different solutions out there. You've got to pick which one's best for you. And then you can even go deeper into, do I want to wet sand it or dry sand it? Now there's a lot of discussion on the internet of should you wet sand or dry sand primer. It doesn't matter. We're not priming cars, we're not priming something that has metal underneath it that could rust. What everyone's concern is primer is porous. It's going to absorb the water. That water is then going to get painted on top of. You've now trapped water into a porous primer touching the metal of your car. Well, the best thing is our cockpits don't have a ton of metal in them, so we're not gonna have any rust issues. So if you wanna go wet sand your primer because you find it easier, go for it. Because the thing I love about wet sanding is it reduces the dust. You're gonna have a paste on your sandpaper, and this putty that we use produces a lot of fine dust. So I'm gonna show you how to dry sand it, but I'm gonna need to wear a respirator for it. And then I'm gonna show you how to wet sand the final finish, and it's gonna look really, really nice. So let's get into it. If I just take the respirator off here, you can see on the sheet here how much dust it's really produced. That's why you've got the respirator on, because that is going to get in the air. There's a ton of it already in the air. You don't want to be breathing that in. All right, so I'm gonna go get a shop vac. I'm gonna suck up all this dust, and then when it's all clean, we're gonna come back and I'm gonna show you what I've done to this piece and the level you wanna get it to. So let's get that shop vac, keep the area safe for us, and then we'll keep going. Now that's nice and clean, we can keep going and I don't have to worry about breathing that in while I'm talking to you. Well, we now have these rounded edges to do. What I'm gonna do is I am gonna wet sand them. So you can use a sanding sponge for this. This is a 120 grit, this is 220. I've even got what they call fine. This is a bit more flexible, which I like. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna give the 220 a go because that was 240 and it was working really well. And we're gonna wet sand the edges and I'll show you how little dust it produces. It really produces no dust at all. It produces just a wet paste that you can wipe away. So what I'm gonna do is we're gonna reach down, we're gonna grab our jug of water and we're gonna go grab our sponge and we're just gonna go dip it in there. It's very scientific. There we go. And now all we want to do is start working the edges. That's looking pretty good. You can see the dark grey is the PLA, light grey is the putty. And you wouldn't have even guessed that's how many low-lying areas there were, but it is what it is. Just bit on the top. Beautiful. And then we're gonna go dry this. PLA, or I'm using PLA Plus, is it's great for water absorption, loves it. So that's why you gotta keep your filaments in a dryer because it just sucks up water in the air. So yeah, give this a dry. You don't have to be super urgent about it, but just don't leave it lying around wet. Now we can go onto our next pieces. You can see I'm going to use the sponge and I'm going to get our 220. Again, it's a wet sand, so I'm not worried about it producing dust. It's going to create a paste and then we're going to start sanding the curve in here. Be very careful with anything stronger than 220, 240. It's gonna go quick. This high build primer or the spray putty isn't super strong. It's easy to sand, it's wonderful stuff. So if you are gonna use 220, 240, do little bits at a time and just make sure that you're not over sanding it. Cool, well that's done. We're gonna finish the rest of this and I'm gonna tell you now about why I use PLA Plus. There's two different main types of plastic that you can use while 3D printing. One is PLA and the other is PETG. And they have their long acronyms that I'll put on the screen below, but they each have their pros and cons. PLA, which is polylactic acid, comes from more of a natural base. It's from your corn starches and it's made from organic products. It's really great for 3D printing. It is the ultimate beginner's 3D printing filament because of how stable it is, low printing temperatures, it's cheap. You really don't need to calibrate your printer to get really good looking prints. The downside is because of the way it's built and its printing temperatures, it can come and be brittle. Now, I'm trying to snap that. That's not what I mean by brittle, but it can be brittle when it's exposed to high temperatures and UV light. The good thing is we're not putting our cockpits in the sun and we're not really going to get to the temperatures that are going to start melting that PLA down. But there are downsides to it. It's not as strong. PETG is the same as a PET bottle. It's just got the G added to it, which is a glycol. It's more of an oil-based product that it's made from. and it's got incredible strength and durability. Now, Open Hornet actually recommends using PETG. So if you want to go use PETG, go for it, because it's strong, it's high temperature resistant, chemically resistant as well, so you can apply alcohol wipes, different primers, different paints, you can use anything on it and it's not going to corrode away, whereas PLA is going to be more sensitive to that. But PETG has the cons of you need to have your printer dialed in. It's not going to give you as nice of a surface finish. It's going to be prone to stringing, which is where you see like little spider webs going between vertical points. It's got its own cons. But I use a product called PLA Plus, and this is what all this is made out of. My entire cockpit is going to be made out of PLA Plus, despite Open Hornet saying use PETG, because I find PLA Plus cheaper and it brings the best of both worlds from each type of plastic. You get the cheap, stable, easy to print, beautiful finish from the PLA, and you get the strength, the temperature and chemically resistant properties from PETG, and you get in one nice package. So yeah, what we're gonna do is continue sanding these components, get them ready, and then I'm gonna leave painting them green for another episode, but I wanna start building and test fitting the left side console over here, showing you the importance of why you don't putty too much, as well as why you don't sand too much, why dry fitting is so important. So let me go and finish prepping all this, and then we're gonna go over there and we are going to start dry fitting it all. Let's get into actually building this left console, give us a bit of a reward for all the hard work that we've put in. I've got all my prepped and primed left console parts there. And you're probably asking, Scott, what are you doing with a bunch of cocktail skewers? Well, I'm here to tell you that a hornet's nest is going environmental. We're holding this thing together with bamboo. No, I'm joking. I'm purely using them to dry fit it because the screws that are actually going to hold it together haven't arrived in the post yet. So we're using cocktail skewers, and you'll see that it's a fairly effective solution, allowing you to dry fit all your parts and they're not going to damage your paint job. So let's get into it and actually start building this. I'm really excited to see how it turns out. So let's move this over here. Let's go. Remember I was telling you about the tongue and grooves? It's going to show you exactly how easy this is to put together. Let's even see if we can start a timer. So we want to go and pop these left console stringers in. And then we want to start. A is going to go there. A doesn't have much support. A is going to always be a bit of a tricky one to put in because it doesn't have anything to hold it, but the rest of them are going to be pretty good. Oh, we got DNA. This one, and it just sits because the guys at Open Hornet did a really good job of making this. Everything just works. And there we go. Well, let's get our little skewers. Let's get our box of components and start piecing it all together. I wonder if you can see here, I think that camera is going to show it the best. So I'm using 18mm MDF because we've only got the metric units here in Australia. It's designed for a 19.05mm gap, or 3/4 inch. So I've got a bit of wiggle room. I could have primed it, but if you are using imperial measurements, such as 3/4 inch MDF or ply, it's designed for 3/4 inch. You're not going to have a lot of wiggle room, so just be careful. Let's go pop. The mere fact that I can actually put this together with bamboo skewers just shows how well it's been made. All we're going to do is grab this piece. That's going to slot on. Don't know which one of these pieces it is. It looks like the right size, but we're going to try it anyway. Might be the wrong way, might be. Who knows? That's right, it seems to work. It does the job. Okay. It's pretty cool. Leave this one lying here. Let me see if I've got a couple of spare panels. So these panels I created before I even knew what Open Hornet was. Might have said it in a previous video. During COVID, I thought I'd trailblaze and create my own Hornet cockpit from scratch, learning Zeus dimensions and general standards of Western built aircraft. And then somebody, once I was like halfway through, showed me Open Hornet. I was like, ah, damn it. It's way better than what I could do. But the panels are still OGs from that, so. Oh, look at that. What's this hide ISO? Yeah. That's very, very cool. And then you're gonna have that join onto it there like that, giving it a bit of trim. And that, I think that actually comes back a tad. There we go. So yeah, that's very, very cool. We've gone full bamboo to join that all together, and it works. That's important to dry fitting. We could go and paint this cockpit green or like the primer green color, all we want. And then when we go piece it together, we're gonna be like, oh, it doesn't fit because I've made it too fat around the pieces that need to actually interlock. I now can see that we've got a pretty perfect fit. I'm not gonna go and paint anymore. I'm not gonna go prime anymore. I'm just gonna leave it the way it is. And then we're gonna build it all up, and then we're gonna spray it as an assembled piece, knowing it all fits together. So yeah, another thing you can see is why I chose not to prep and prime the MDF edges is you can barely see most of them. You can see one here, one obviously along the bottom of the rail, these up here. This edge is going to be covered by the trim. Don't waste your time prepping and priming areas that you're not going to see. Let them be their original shape and size. It's going to make the fit a whole lot easier. Then at the end, like we're doing now, we can identify areas we want to tidy up, and then we can just target that. So yeah, and that's my custom Zeus railing that I've added to the Open Hornet system. They've got very location specific Zeus holes for their panels. I want this to be a little bit more future-proof, so I've gone and inserted all of them to be aligned with Open Hornets. That way I can use Open Hornet panels, I can use my panels, I can use future-made panels. and I know they're gonna fit pretty well. So that's it. Hope you got something out of today. We went through prepping and priming, how to sand it, dry fitting with bamboo. The lesson learned of don't delay your order on the screws because that's gonna be the thing you're waiting on. So yeah, I hope you have a wonderful week ahead. I hope you're enjoying watching the series. Next episode, if the screws arrive in time, we're going to be building the right side console and now the left side console, and we're going to paint it the interior green, which is just a chromate green. It's a aircraft primer that etches into the aluminium, making it fairly corrosion resistant. Then on top of that, they apply the base color. And I want that green because when I wear through this over time, I want that green to start showing, making it look a little bit more realistic. So go enjoy your week ahead, enjoy your flight simming. As always, stay safe, and I will see you in the next episode.